Adaptations to temperature. We are going to talk about adaptations to cold and adaptations to heat. Between the adaptations to cold, we find when individuals come together to increase temperature around them, as we are watching here. In this picture, we are watching penguins come together to increase the temperature around them. Another adaptation is the skin insulation, because they accumulate fat under skin or they have a lot of hair, as we are watching here in this picture with a polar bear. Other adaptation is hibernation and lethargy. Okay, these concepts are very similar. Adaptations is related to hot-blooded animals and cold-blooded ones, and lethargy is more related to cold-blooded animals. They are very similar, but they have some differences. Hibernation used to be for a longer period of time, and lethargy used to be for a shorter period of time. Hibernation is related to a lack of food and a decrease in temperature, and lethargy is more related to the decrease in temperature. But both of them produce the metabolic rate slows down during winter to survive better. Other adaptations to cold are in plants, for example, where they grow close to the ground to avoid heat loss, or when they have the more important organs growing underground to protect them. Or, for example, when leaves fall in autumn, so they don't have to feed them to save some energy. The adaptations to heat are, for example, when animals live or partially live underground. For example, clamships live underground, or sweating is another adaptation to heat, or when animals have nocturnal habits. In plants, for example, we find small leaves or thorns to avoid dehydrations, or we find greater branch density to obtain cooler temperature in the center. But this adaptation is used to in cool temperatures because they obtain, in this case, warmer temperature in the center. Adaptations to humidity or to water scarcity. Okay, water is an essential molecule for life to exist. So, living things have developed a range of adaptations in order to find water here or to avoid losing it. To find water, for example, we can find in plants roots develop and go deeper to search for that water. In animals, for example, here, water is produced inside the organism by metabolic reactions. Related to avoid losing it, to avoid losing water, we find in plants, for example, drought-resistant seeds, or, for example, leaves with few stomata, pores that open only at night to reduce water loss. The same with small leaves. Small leaves reduce water loss. And completing their life cycle in the season that favors their development. So that means when there is water. To avoid losing water, we find in animals too a structure resistant to drying, such as exoskeleton in arthropods or scale in reptiles, or, for example, excretion products that have very little water, such as semi-solid urine. And to avoid losing water, we can have two nocturnal habits. Adaptations to light. We can talk about plants, algae, aquatic environments, and animals. Talking about plants, we find the epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants that climb other plants looking for light. In this picture, for example, we are watching epiphytes. Talking about algae, we have to differentiate between red algae, brown algae, and red algae. What is the difference between them? Okay, green algae only have chlorophyll because they are living near the surface and they have to capture the sunlight. Brown algae have a brown pigment that allows them to live in deeper waters. And red ones have a red pigment that allows them to live very deep in the ocean. The green algae need more light, brown algae need less light, and red algae need even less light. Okay, talking about aquatic environments, we can differentiate two zones. The photic zone when you have light and the aphotic zone where you don't have light. You can find higher amount of light in the photic zone. Why? Because you have here producers, consumers, and decomposers. But if you go down, you find less amount of light. Why? Because in this zone, photosynthetic organisms disappear because we don't have light. So if we don't have producers, how do they eat? How do they live? Okay, they live from the organic matter produced in the upper layers. It's produced here in the upper layers of the ocean and sinks to the bottom. And these organisms are living from this organic matter that sinks at the bottom of the ocean. Talking about animals, we find daytime animals and nocturnal animals. Daytime animals whose eyes are adapted to see with a lot of light. A lynx, for example, can see a rabbit at 300 meters. Nocturnal animals, on the other way, they have eyes adapted to see in very low light conditions. For example, the owl. The owl is the bird with the most developed night vision. Another adaptation of nocturnal animals is when they can emit light. They are bioluminescents, such as jellies, for example, or fireflies. The adaptation to lack of oxygen. Where can we find a lack of oxygen? We find it especially in high altitudes and aquatic environments. Why? Because the concentration of oxygen decreases as we go deeper in aquatic environment or as we go higher in high altitudes. Okay, the main adaptations in high altitudes are these: an increase in lung capacity, and this one, an increase in red blood cells, which are smaller too. These two adaptations led to mountain animals such as vultures, for example, fox, goats, or llamas breathing better with less oxygen. So we find here different kind of mountain animals that can breathing better because these two adaptations. In aquatic environments, we find that cetaceans have a higher percentage of blood than other mammals, and they can accumulate oxygen in their muscles. We find this, for example, in whales, killer whales, belugas, and dolphins. And the last adaptation is a very curious one, is lethargy. We find lethargy, for example, in turtles that have to survive underwater. We are watching a turtle in this video, underwater in cold seasons with very, very few oxygen. How can they do that? Okay, new research has revealed that when turtle embryos are exposed to low levels of oxygen, it programs their hearts to be more resilient to such conditions for the rest of their lives. So they reduce their heart rate when they are underwater. The blood flowing to the organs is reduced to except heart and brain because they are the main organs, and they reduce their metabolism. Apart from this, they also use the reserve of nutrients they have stored in the bodies during warmer seasons when food is more abundant. And this is leading us to the next adaptations, that is the adaptation to lack of food. The adaptation to lack of food. Okay, the ability to survive for a long period of time without food is more common in terrestrial animals than aquatic ones. Why? Because we find more food regularly in terrestrial environments than aquatic ones. The first adaptation to lack of food is this: decrease in respiratory rate and decrease in heart rate, leading this to a decrease in temperature and a decrease in metabolism. So this animal can live more time with less food. Okay, some specific adaptations are, for example, in mammals, some mammals accumulate fat under skin during warmer seasons, so they can hibernate in cool season using that fat. Another adaptation that we find, for example, in reptiles is lethargy. What is the difference between lethargy and hibernation? Okay, animals that have lethargy are sleeping, and when they have hibernation is an inactive period in winter. Is different. In this video, for example, we see the alligator breathe through the ACE layer. This is a ACE layer, and they are breathing through this. Okay, other mammals we are watching now, this squirrel, store food in secret places. It's like, okay, this is a joke, but it's like they have been going to the supermarket for a long period of time to have food keeping in secret places for the cold season. And the last adaptation to lack of food is migration. Migrations, we can find migration in fish, birds, mammals. Where do they move? Okay, they move where food is more abundant. Adaptations to the concentration of salt. Okay, first of all, we have to know that the concentration of salt in the environment is very important because it controls the amount of water that goes in and goes out of an organism's cells in a process known as osmosis. For example, if the environment has a high concentration of salt, too much water leaves the organism, causing it to die. On the opposite, if the concentration of salt is too low, too much water enters inside the organism and it cannot survive. Okay, the adaptations can be in plants or in animals. For example, in plants we find halophytes. Halophytes are able to secrete excess salt through their leaves because they are living in an environment with a lot of salt. And because of this, they are able to live where most plants die. Other adaptations to high concentration of salts in marine birds are that they expel a salty solution through their salty glands. Salty glands are these. They are connected to the nostrils. The nostrils are here, and because of them, they can expel a salty solution. And because of this, they are able to drink seawater. On the other hand, other animals, such as marine invertebrates, they don't have to do that because their cells have the same salt concentration on the external environment. So there is no excess of water entering or exciting the organism. No water entering, no water exciting the organism. Let's go with the fish. We find cartilaginous fish and saltwater bony fish. They are both in the ocean where we find high concentration of salt. Remember that when we find high concentration of salt, we are losing water from the inside of the organism. So, in cartilaginous fish, to compensate the losing of water, they absorb water through gills and skin. In bony fish, they drink water through the mouth. Besides, our cartilaginous fish are ingesting salt with food. They excrete salt in urine by a rectal gland that is very close to their caudal fin. And the same in bony fish. They expel salt through the gills, and as they are losing water, they produce a very concentrated urine, very few urine. On the opposite, when we go to freshwater bony fish, in freshwater the salt concentrations is very low. It's the opposite. They are winning water. So as they are winning water, they don't drink water. They don't drink water at all. And they produce a lot of urine because they have to compensate the wind of water. The adaptation to pressure. Where can we find a strong increase in pressure? Okay, we find it underwater. As we go deeper in the ocean, the pressure increases a lot. We are going to talk about two adaptations, swimming bladder and flat shape. We find swimming bladder in bony fish. And how does this work? Okay, the swimming bladder is an organ. This is the swimming bladder that is full of air. When we want to go up, when we want to float, and it empties of air when we want to go down. So we can stay in depth without wasting energy. As we know, air makes you float. In this video, for example, we can see a clownfish trying to go up, but he can't because its swimming bladder doesn't work. He's trying to go up, but he can't. Okay, the other adaptation is flat shape. We find flat shape in deep sea fish. Why? Because as we go deeper in the ocean, the pressure increases a lot. So to support better the high pressure, they have this shape. Okay, they are flat. They are plane. Why? Because if you are plane, you distribute the pressure between more points, so you can survive with that pressure much better. We are watching here a flat fish swimming very deep in the ocean. Just as environmental conditions affect living things can also change the environment they live in. So now we are going to talk about how living things change their environment. For example, talking about soils. Lichens and moss help in the formation of soil by breaking rocks. When this soil is formed, roots help to compact the soil, avoiding erosion. But if the roots become too big, they can break rocks and soil, accelerating the erosion process. On the other hand, we find seabirds, for example, that produce phosphorus-rich excrement called guano that is a very good fertilizer for soil. This is the guano. And other animals such as clumsy or earthworms move and air the soil, which increase the fertility of soil. Coral reefs, for example, are very important because they decrease the CO2 levels because they are taking the CO2 to form their skeletons. These skeletons are used too as a food source for other animals. And coral reefs protect the coast from erosion. So coral reefs are very, very important. To end up, we're going to talk about photosynthetic organisms. What do? Of course, they increase the concentration of oxygen in our atmosphere, and the vegetation produce an evaporation of water through their leaves, increasing the humidity and creating a microclimate. This microclimate is produced too because the vegetation prevents sunlight from passing through, and this is very, very good for our environments.